We represent, in a way, a balancing act in the industry. We look at trying to solve some of these inefficiencies to give life to drugs that otherwise would not be economic and would not see the light of day. Hello, I'm James Garner. I'm the Chief Executive of Kazia Therapeutics. I want to talk today about the problem of innovation in the pharmaceutical industry. We're really an industry of two different kinds of companies. On the one hand, we have smaller biotech companies, which take a piece of their own proprietary intellectual property. They have their own scientists, their own laboratories, and they work hard over many years trying to take that intellectual property all the way to patients, all the way to a commercial pharmaceutical product. And there are many companies that have been incredibly successful in doing that, but there's also many that have stumbled along the way. And the reason is that this is an incredibly risky business model. It anchors the company completely to the quality of its intellectual property. It makes it in many ways an all or nothing bet on a particular piece of science, a particular piece of technology. And it requires the companies themselves to be really good at all stages of the drug development process. They've got to be great at the lab science. They've got to be great at clinical development. They've got to even be great at commercializing their products. And very few companies are able to do all those things. At the other end of the spectrum, we have large pharmaceutical companies which produce many, many more drug candidates than they have capacity and resources to take forward. And as a result, they have to make decisions about what to advance and what to shelve. And those decisions are not easy decisions to make. It's very difficult to tell the future and the opportunity around a drug. Many of the most successful pharmaceutical products that we know today were very borderline at many points during their development. And so many big pharmaceutical companies end up taking very, very promising drugs and not taking them forward for reasons that are nothing to do with the quality of the drug and all to do with the strategy of the company or their available resources or their current prioritization. And because of those two things, we end up with an industry in aggregate that is both failure prone and which leaves good drugs on the table, which fails to fully exploit the wonderful science that we all work on. And that inefficiency fundamentally is what we've tried to tackle in Kazia. There's at least two reasons why this leaves everybody much less well off. By perpetuating these sort of inefficiencies in the system, by having this very high failure rate in younger companies, by having so much work, so much sunk cost shelved in larger companies, we in aggregate raise the cost of development of new drugs. And a figure that's familiar to all of us is that the cost of developing a new medicine is typically estimated somewhere between $1 and $1.5 billion US per drug. And a fair part of that cost really represents the sunk cost of all the drugs that didn't move forward, all the ones that fell over along the way for the one drug that did get to the end of the journey. And if we could bring more of that work along, then it would dramatically, on average, reduce the cost of new medicines, change the economics of the business, and allow us to get a lot more done with the resources that we can put into drug development as a society. And that happens at a broad macroeconomic level, but it also happens in terms of specific diseases, because when you look at that cost, $1 and $1.5 billion to develop a new drug, it automatically screens out many smaller illnesses that really don't represent that sort of market opportunity. It forces companies towards what is usually referred to as the blockbuster model of drug development. We're looking for these billion-dollar drugs because those are the only ones that can really make it worth all the failures that happen along the way. Whereas if we could take forward some of these promising drugs in smaller niche indications, we could really make a much, much broader impact on society. We could treat not just the big diseases, lung cancer, breast cancer, bowel cancer, but also the much more niche diseases, conditions like brain cancer, where we haven't been able to serve patients very well to date. And so these inefficiencies in our industry, this relatively boilerplate linear way of doing things, has a real consequence for society in terms of the cost of drug development, and therefore the exclusion of some very, very high need but smaller population diseases. We don't invent drugs. We don't participate at all in the drug discovery game. We have no laboratories and no scientists of our own. Rather, we go out and look for the drugs that really excite us, but which currently sit in other companies and which don't fit for their parent companies. They're not strategic. They don't fit with that company's strategy. And these are drugs, of course, that would otherwise get left on the shelf. They would otherwise never see the light of day, and otherwise never have the opportunity to benefit patients. We take those drugs into our pipeline and we take them forward in Kazia. And we try to do so in a very, very different way. Instead of very traditional drug development where we do it all in-house, all in our company, we do this through very innovative partnerships with clinicians, with academic research groups, through investigator-initiated work. We heavily leverage grant funding. And this brings to the work we do a very, very different economics from a traditional large pharmaceutical company. Typical company will allocate 100 to 150 FTEs to a new drug development program in the clinic. We have very many fewer people than that in our company. And so we're really obliged to find a much, much more efficient and agile way to do this. And so our approach in Kazia is to take these underappreciated drugs, these drugs that have not been prioritized by their parent companies. We bring to them a very, very different style of development. And we focus on doing just this one thing well, just the clinical development task. And by doing that, we look to realize the value that sits in them. We look to unlock the economics that's already been invested in these assets, but we also look to bring the benefit to patients that they represent. So we represent, in a way, a balancing act in the industry. We look at trying to solve some of these inefficiencies to give life to drugs that otherwise would not be economic and would not see the light of day.